It was supposed to be a simple moment of relief being discharged from the hospital after a difficult week. I sat on the edge of the bed, still a little weak, clutching my phone while waiting for my son Michael to pull up. For all the years I had poured into raising him, I thought the least he could do was help me get home. When the notification buzzed, I expected to see a message telling me he was outside. Instead, what I read left me stunned. "We can't keep dropping everything for you. Call an Uber." Those words sliced through me sharper than any pain the doctors had warned me about. My own son, dismissing me as though I were nothing more than an inconvenience. I sat there for a moment, staring at the tiny screen, unable to move. After everything, after raising him alone when his father passed, after working extra shifts, after giving him the best life I could, this was what I meant to him. A burden. My heart sank deeper than it had in years. The nurse bustled in to remind me of my paperwork, but her words blurred into background noise. All I could hear was the echo of that message. Call an Uber. Like I was some stranger he barely knew. Like I hadn't sacrificed holidays, sleep, and my own dreams just so he could build his. Walking out of those hospital doors, I felt a kind of loneliness I can't quite describe. It was more than being alone. It was being invisible, neglected by the one person I thought I could count on. I wanted to believe he was just busy, just stressed, just careless. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't a slip. It was the truth finally showing itself. And that truth left me hollow. But life has a way of placing new doors right where one seems to slam shut. As I stood by the curb, fumbling for the rideshare app through blurred vision, a man approached me. He said my name with a certainty that made me look up. There was something familiar in his eyes, though I couldn't place it yet. That's how I met Robert Hamilton. And little did I know, this man was about to change everything I thought I knew about my son and about my own past. When Robert first spoke my name, I thought he was just another hospital staff member who had read it off a clipboard. But then he introduced himself, steady and professional, and explained why he had sought me out. He wasn't a nurse or a doctor. He was a bank manager, and he was there because of Michael. My chest tightened as he gently laid it out. My son had come to the bank more than once, spinning a story about me that sounded like a bad play, how I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, how my health had declined to the point where he alone should control everything. He had painted me as a confused old woman who couldn't tell one bill from another. Michael had gone as far as filing paperwork that suggested I was incompetent, using my hospital stay as proof. I felt my breath catch. The betrayal cut deeper than the text message ever could. I wasn't just an inconvenience to him. I was a stepping stone to money and power. He was dismantling my identity, piece by piece, rewriting me as useless, so he could benefit. I stared at Robert as he spoke, my mind reeling. How could my son, the boy I nursed through fevers, the young man I cheered for at graduations, the father I supported when his own family started turn around and erase me so casually? The outrage burned hot, but beneath it was a deeper wound, the realization that Michael had chosen greed over love. Robert paused, studying me closely. It was then he asked, almost cautiously, if my maiden name had been Sullivan. My breath hitched again, but for a different reason this time. Yes, it was. He blinked, and then a softness washed over his expression that I hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for years. He said his name again, slower this time, like peeling back a curtain. Robert Hamilton. And suddenly, time folded in on itself. I wasn't a weary mother betrayed by her son. I was a young girl again, standing in the park on a humid summer night, holding hands with Bobby Hamilton, the boy who had promised me forever before life and lies tore us apart. It was like a shock of electricity through my veins. 45 years of distance, of silence, of wondering what might have been, collapsed into that one moment. But before I could fully sink into the memory, he brought me back to the present. The warmth in his eyes was real, but so was the urgency. My son's fraud wasn't just a matter of disappointment, it was a ticking clock. And Robert, my Bobby, was the one standing between me and losing everything. For a moment, standing there with Robert, I felt time unravel. The years seemed to slip away, leaving only the memory of two young hearts that once beat in rhythm. We had been inseparable once, dreaming of a future together. But I remembered the sudden distance, the unanswered letters, the silence that grew until it felt like he had abandoned me. Now, listening to him, I learned the truth neither of us had known back then. His letters had been hidden, mine too. My parents, afraid of what our young love might mean for my future, had stepped in with quiet interference, and his family, convinced I wasn't the right match, had done the same. We had both been convinced that the other had turned away. In reality, it was lies and manipulation that cut the threads between us. There was a bittersweet ache as we pieced it all together. The stolen years, the paths we had walked separately, the lives we had built without one another, it all pressed down like a weight. But under that heaviness was something undeniable. The connection was still there. His voice carried the same steadiness I remembered, and his eyes. They still had the warmth that once made me feel safe. I found myself smiling through tears, remembering the sound of his laughter on summer evenings, the way we used to talk about everything and nothing at the same time. There was comfort in knowing it had been real, even if the world had pulled us apart. But as tender as that rediscovery was, reality did not wait long to intrude. Robert's expression grew serious again, and he pulled out the file he had been carrying. Inside were copies of the documents Michael had submitted, the forged signatures, the falsified medical notes, the financial statements riddled with lies. He had even filed papers claiming I suffered from cognitive decline, all to justify taking control of my finances. The sting was immediate, sharper than any wound the past had left. To see my own son's handwriting on documents that erased my dignity, it was almost too much to bear. The nostalgia gave way to a rising heat in my chest, a fury I couldn't ignore. Robert touched my hand, steadying me, reminding me that I wasn't powerless. The truth was in front of us, and the lies could be undone. As I looked down at the evidence, the tears on my cheeks dried into resolve. My son might have tried to rewrite my story, but I wasn't finished yet. I would face him. I sat with the stack of papers Robert had given me spread out across my lap, each sheet a fresh cut to the heart. My son's handwriting, his neat signature, was there on documents that declared I was confused, incapable, and unsafe to handle my own life. He had taken the moments when I forgot small things, when I was tired or recovering from illness, and twisted them into a story that painted me as a frail old woman who couldn't be trusted. Every word was a betrayal. As I read, the memories collided with the ink on the page. I remembered staying up past midnight sewing costumes for his school play. I remembered clipping coupons, taking on extra shifts, and going without so he could have what he needed. I remembered watching him graduate, pride swelling in my chest. And now, that same boy had built a false case against me, reducing a lifetime of love and sacrifice to the ugly lie of incompetence. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something else began to rise: anger. Not the fleeting kind that passes after an argument, but a deep, steady fire that comes from knowing someone has crossed an unforgivable line. I had given Michael everything I had to give, and now he was trying to take the last thing left: my dignity. For a moment, I almost let the grief consume me. But then, I heard Robert's words in my head. I wasn't powerless. I still had my voice, my clarity, my truth. Michael had made one mistake that would become his undoing. He underestimated me. If he wanted the world to believe I was confused and weak, then maybe it was time to let him walk straight into his own trap. I could play the part he had written for me long enough to see his lies exposed. Then, when the time was right, I would show everyone exactly how wrong he was. The thought steadied me. My heartbreak hardened into determination. I wasn't going to shrink under the weight of his betrayal. I was going to stand up, face him, and make sure he could never erase me again. I folded the papers, tucked them back into the file, and looked at Robert. My decision was made. The next time Michael tried to sell his lies, I would be there ready to confront him in front of the very people he had deceived. And for once, he would have to look his mother in the eye. The air in the bank conference room felt heavy when I walked in, almost like it was holding its breath. Through the crack in the door, I had already caught a glimpse of Michael, sitting at the table with his shoulders squared, his tone polished and convincing. He was mid-sentence, spinning his story to the loan officer with all the charm he could muster. He spoke of sacrifice, of how he was the only one holding his family together while caring for a sick, fading mother. He painted a picture of himself as the dutiful son, burdened by responsibility. And from the way the officer nodded, I could tell his performance was working. But then I stepped through the doorway. I watched the confidence drain from Michael's face like water from a cracked glass. His eyes widened, his mouth faltered, and for the first time in years, he looked like a boy caught in a lie. The silence that followed was almost sweet, a silence that told me the story he had crafted was already unraveling. I took my seat at the end of the table, calm, deliberate, as though I had every right to be there, which, of course, I did. My hands rested steady on the folder Robert had given me, though I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to. My very presence was the proof. I spoke softly but firmly, not raising my voice, not needing to. I told the loan officer I was Dorothy Parker, the woman Michael had just described as weak, confused, and incapable of managing her own life. I explained how I had come straight from the hospital, fully aware, fully competent, and more than capable of speaking for myself. The officer leaned back, surprised, clearly reassessing everything he had just heard. Michael stammered, his voice cracking as he tried to regain control of the narrative. But the more he spoke, the less convincing he became. Inside, my heart was pounding, but outwardly, I was calm. It was a strange kind of victory, sitting there across from the son who had reduced me to a shadow in his story, and proving him wrong without raising my voice. For once, Michael was the one on shaky ground, and I knew this was only the beginning. The folder in front of me held every lie he had written, every false claim he had made, and soon the world would see it. Michael's face shifted quickly from shock to indignation, as though he could will the room back under his control. He leaned forward, his voice tight and urgent, insisting that I was confused, that I didn't understand what was happening. He claimed the hospital had noted signs of disorientation, that I was fragile and unable to keep up with my finances. It was the same story he had woven on paper, now spilling from his mouth in a desperate attempt to drown me out. I sat quietly, letting him speak, letting his lies tangle around him like threads he couldn't stop pulling. My silence unnerved him. The more I refused to rise to his bait, the more frantic he became. His words, once smooth and calculated, grew sharp and uneven. He raised his voice, gesturing wildly, like a man trying to catch a ship that had already sailed. And then Robert placed the folder on the table. The loan officer's attention shifted immediately as Robert slid out the first document, a forged medical note declaring me unfit to handle daily tasks. My name was there, but the handwriting wasn't mine. The dates didn't match my hospital records. It was a sloppy imitation, one Michael must have thought no one would bother to check. Michael tried to laugh it off, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that he had only been trying to protect me. His voice dripped with false concern, but the cracks were too wide to cover now. Robert pulled out the next piece bank statements altered to show missing payments that had never actually existed. The officer compared them with the originals Robert had obtained, and the discrepancies were undeniable. Every page Robert laid down was another nail in the coffin of Michael's performance. He grew redder, his words more frantic, his tone swinging from pleading to defensive to outright angry. At one point, he even turned to me, trying to summon that old bond between mother and son. He said I was remembering things wrong, that I was letting outsiders poison my mind. That moment hurt more than I can describe. To hear my own son look me in the eye and try to erase my truth, it was a pain deeper than the fraud, deeper than the forged papers. It was the betrayal of love itself. My chest ached, but I refused to let him see me crumble. Instead, I lifted my chin and told the officer I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. My voice was steady, stronger than I felt inside, but it carried enough weight to silence the room. Robert then revealed the final piece recordings of Michael's phone calls, where he described me as a burden, a liability, someone who needed to be handled. The sound of his voice filled the room, undeniable, his words sharp and selfish. The officer's expression hardened with every second of playback. Michael collapsed into his chair, his hands clutching his temples. The performance was over, and all that remained was the truth. I should have felt only triumph, but my heart was heavy. This was my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, now exposed as someone who would sacrifice his own mother for money. The grief was sharp, but it was threaded with relief, because at least now, the lies could no longer grow. Justice had begun to take root right there in that bank office. As the meeting ended, the officer assured me steps would be taken, that the fraud would not stand. Michael didn't look at me as he left, shoulders hunched, the weight of exposure heavy on him. I remained in my chair for a moment longer, breathing deeply, torn between heartbreak and vindication. This chapter was closing, but the lessons it carried would stay with me forever. When I walked out of that bank, The autumn air felt different on my skin. It was cool, sharp, and real, as though the world had shifted back into focus. For weeks, maybe months, I had been walking through a fog of hurt, confusion, and betrayal. But now, with Michael's lies exposed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: clarity. The officer promised that the fraudulent documents would be investigated, that the damage my son tried to cause would be undone. I wasn't going to lose my home, my savings, or my independence. I had been given back what Michael tried to take away from me: the simple truth of who I am, a capable woman, a mother, a survivor. Michael didn't speak to me as he left the room. He avoided my eyes, shoulders slumped, anger and shame mixing into silence. And though I told myself I should feel only relief, my heart ached. I carried the weight of knowing the boy I once tucked into bed had grown into a man who saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle. That kind of wound doesn't heal quickly. But it doesn't mean life stops. Robert walked beside me as we left, steady and quiet. There was no need for words in that moment. His presence was enough. I thought about how life had brought him back to me in such an unexpected way. We had lost decades to lies and circumstances we couldn't control. But here he was again, offering not just support, but companionship. It was proof that life, even when it feels cruel, sometimes circles back with second chances. In the days that followed, I reflected often on what had happened. I thought about the danger of underestimating ourselves when others try to erase us. Michael wanted the world to believe I was weak, fading, incapable. And maybe there were moments in the hospital when I looked that way. But weakness isn't the same as worthlessness. Being tired, being vulnerable, needing help, those are human things. They don't make us invisible. What saved me was refusing to let his version of me become the truth. With Robert's help, I stood up and reminded the world and myself that my story was still mine to tell. I don't know what Michael's future will look like. His choices will follow him, and the trust we once had may never return. That loss will always sit heavy in my heart. But I also know I can't let his betrayal define me. Life is too short to let someone else's greed erase the years of love, sacrifice, and strength that built me. Instead, I am choosing to lean into what remains: my freedom, my dignity, and maybe, just maybe, a renewed love with Robert, who never stopped believing in who I was, even when decades stood between us. If there's one thing I want to leave with anyone listening, it's this: never let someone else write your story for you. No matter your age, no matter your struggles, your voice matters. You are not invisible. And sometimes, even after heartbreak, life surprises us with hope we thought was gone. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or erased, I'd love to hear your voice. Share your experience in the comments. Like and share this story so others can be reminded of their own strength. Because our stories matter. Yours matters.